A desperate mother living in her car spends her last $100 on a condemned, rotting motel. Everyone called her crazy. The town wanted it demolished, but they didn't know about the reinforced steel trapdoor hidden beneath the floorboards of room 14 and the billion-dollar secret waiting in the dark. The rain in Oak Haven, Oregon, didn't just fall. It bit. For 32-year-old Sarah Higgins, that rain was a constant reminder of how rapidly her life had unraveled. 6 months ago, she was a shift manager at a logistics firm. Then came the corporate buyout, the immediate layoffs, and the sudden, terrifying realization that she was 3 paychecks away from the street. When the eviction notice was pinned to her apartment door, she had packed everything she and her 7-year-old son Noah owned into the trunk of a 2008 Honda Civic. For 3 weeks, that car had been their entire world. They slept in the parking lot behind the county hospital, relying on the security guard's silent pity to avoid being chased away. But November was closing in, bringing the bitter Pacific Northwest frost. Noah had asthma, and the damp cold of the car was settling deep into his lungs. His nighttime coughing fits terrified Sarah. She had precisely $114 left in her checking account. She needed a miracle, or she was going to lose her son to the foster system. A county social worker named Diane Miller had already left 2 voicemails on Sarah's prepaid phone, citing concerns about Noah's primary residence. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah walked into the Oak Haven Municipal Building, dragging Noah by the hand, simply to get out of the freezing downpour. She hadn't planned to attend the county tax default property auction. She just wanted to sit in the heated back row of the auditorium while Noah colored in his sketchbook. At the podium, Robert Callahan, the county auctioneer, was sweating through his cheap suit. The room was mostly empty, populated only by a few local contractors, and Gregory Hayes, a ruthless real estate developer who owned half the commercial zoning in Oak Haven. Moving on to Parcel 88, Callahan announced, wiping his forehead. The Whispering Pines Motor Lodge, 4,200 Old Mill Road. We're starting the bidding at $10,000 for the land value. Who'll give me 10? Silence. Gregory Hayes let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Callahan, you're joking, Hayes called out from the second row. That place is a toxic wasteland. It's been abandoned since 1998. The roof is collapsed, the foundation is cracked, and there's a city demolition lien on it. Whoever buys the deed assumes the $60,000 asbestos cleanup liability. Condemn it. Let the county bulldoze it on taxpayer dimes, and I'll buy the dirt for $5,000 next month. Callahan sighed. Hayes was right. The Whispering Pines was a notorious eyesore, a relic of the 1950s logging boom, built by a reclusive eccentric named Harrison Cole, who had vanished decades ago. Since then, it had sat rotting behind an overgrown perimeter of dead blackberries. The county is highly motivated to offload this property today. Callahan pushed, sounding desperate. It's an absolute auction. We waive the back taxes. You take the quitclaim deed and the property liability as is. Do I hear 5,000 sorsha? Silence. 1,000 nothing. The auctioneer looked defeated. Folks, the county just wants this off the ledger. I am legally permitted to accept any minimum bid to clear the title transfer. Do I have $100? Sarah froze. She looked at her bank app on her cracked phone screen. Available balance $114. She looked at Noah, who was shivering in his damp jacket, tracing the outline of a house on his drawing pad with a blue crayon. If she bought it, she would own property. It was a ruin, yes. It was a liability, but it was a structure with walls, a private address to give the social worker. It meant they wouldn't be trespassing. It meant they could park the car on their own land. Before her rational brain could stop her, Sarah's hand shot up into the air. The entire auditorium turned to look at her. Gregory Hayes shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing at the bedraggled woman in the back row. "I have a bid," Callahan said, his voice cracking with shock. $100 in the back. Going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel slammed down like a gunshot. 20 minutes later, sitting in the fluorescent-lit clerk's office, Sarah handed over a crumpled $50 bill and 2 20s, followed by a handful of quarters and dimes scraped from her car's cup-holder. The clerk, an older woman named Brenda, looked at Sarah with deep, sorrowful pity as she stamped the quitclaim deed. "Honey," Brenda whispered, sliding the heavy brass keys across the counter. "I don't know what you're planning, but you can't live there. The city cut the water and power 20 years ago. The East Wing roof is completely caved in. It's a death trap." "It's mine, though?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling as she clutched the paperwork. "Legally, they can't kick me off the land. It's yours," Brenda said softly. "God help you, it's yours." The drive up Old Mill Road took 20 minutes. When the Honda's headlights finally swept across the property, Sarah's stomach plummeted. The Whispering Pines Motor Lodge was a nightmare. A rusted neon sign leaned precariously over the entrance. The U-shaped building was swallowed by aggressive ivy and suffocating moss. Half of the doors were missing, exposing the gutted black interiors of the motel rooms to the elements. But as Sarah drove slowly around the gravel lot, her headlights illuminated the back corner. Room 14. Unlike the rest of the building room, 14 was somewhat shielded by a massive ancient oak tree. The roof above it wasn't sagging. The door was intact, locked tight, and the window was boarded up from the inside, preventing the rain from rotting the interior. "Is this our new house, Mum?" Noah asked, peering through the rain-streaked windshield, his voice thick with apprehension. "It's a fixer-upper baby," Sarah said, forcing a brave smile. She killed the engine and grabbed a heavy Maglite flashlight from the glove box. "But it's ours. No one can tell us to leave." Using the master key, she wrestled with the rusted deadbolt of room 14 until it finally gave way with a screech. She pushed the door open. The smell of stale, trapped air and dust billowed out, but miraculously, it didn't smell like mold. It smelled dry. She flashed the light inside. The room was stripped bare of furniture. The floral wallpaper was peeling in massive strips, and the hideous mustard-yellow shag carpet was stained and hard with age. But it was dry. The walls were solid. They hauled their sleeping bags, a Coleman camping stove, and a cooler of food inside. Sarah pushed a heavy wooden dresser she found in the bathroom against the door to barricade them in. That night, wrapped in layers of blankets, Noah didn't cough once. Listening to the rain hammer harmlessly against the roof, Sarah held her son tight. She had spent her last dollar, but for the first time in a month, she felt a microscopic glimmer of safety. She had no idea that the real danger wasn't outside in the rain. It was directly beneath her. By the third day, the freezing reality of their situation had set in. The motel was a fortress of isolation. Sarah spent her days painstakingly clearing debris from the parking lot, trying to make the property look occupied, so the county wouldn't send inspectors. She collected rainwater in plastic buckets to boil on the camp stove, but her immediate problem was the floor in room 14. Right in the center of the room, there was a severe dip in the mustard-yellow carpet. Every time Sarah stepped on it, the floor beneath gave way slightly with a sickening crunch. She was terrified that the wooden subfloor had rotted through and that Noah might step on it and break his leg. On Thursday afternoon, while Noah was sitting on his sleeping bag reading a library book, Sarah took a rusted crowbar she had found out back and knelt by the depression in the floor. "Just going to fix this soft spot, buddy," she told him. She drove the sharp end of the crowbar through the stiff ancient carpet and ripped it backward. A cloud of suffocating dust plumed into the air. She coughed, waving it away, and pulled up a larger square of the carpet, exposing the subfloor. Only it wasn't wood. Sarah wiped her gritty hands on her jeans and stared. Beneath the carpet wasn't rotting plywood or cracked concrete. It was solid, cold steel. Frowning, she pulled up more of the carpet, tearing her fingernails in the process. The steel plate was roughly 4 feet by 4 feet. In the center of the dark metal lay a heavy, recessed iron ring. It was a trap door. Sarah's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Why would a cheap 1950s roadside motel have a heavy-grade steel trap door hidden beneath the flooring, Noah? Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "Stay on your bed. Don't come over here." She wedged the crowbar under the heavy iron ring and threw her entire body weight backward. For a moment, nothing happened. The door was sealed shut by decades of rust and gravity. Sarah gritted her teeth, her muscles burning, and pulled until she thought her spine would snap. With a deafening crack that echoed off the peeling wallpaper, the seal broke. The steel door groaned on massive hidden hinges and swung upward. A rush of cold, strangely sterile air blew up from the darkness, carrying the faint scent of ozone and machine oil. Sarah shone her mag light down the hole. A tight spiral staircase made of wrought iron descended into absolute blackness. This wasn't a standard basement or a maintenance crawl space. The engineering was military grade. "Mom," Noah whimpered, shrinking back against the wall. "I don't like that." "It's okay," Sarah breathed, mesmerized by the abyss. "It's just a basement. I'm going to look down there. I'll be right back. Do not move from that bed." Holding the heavy flashlight like a weapon, Sarah stepped onto the first iron grate of the staircase. It didn't squeak. It was as solid as bedrock. She descended slowly, counting the steps. 10, 20, 30. She was going incredibly deep, at least 3 stories underground. The temperature dropped sharply, chilling the sweat on the back of her neck. When she reached the bottom, her boots hit a smooth, poured concrete floor. She swept the flashlight beam across the room, and her breath caught in her throat. She was standing in a massive subterranean bunker. It was roughly the size of a gymnasium. The walls were lined with thick steel reinforcement beams. But it wasn't empty. To her left, there were banks of massive antiquated diesel generators and air filtration systems. To her right, towering metal shelving units stretched toward the ceiling, stacked with what looked like thousands of MRE's meals ready to eat and water barrels all coated in a thick layer of dust. Harrison Cole, the eccentric man who built the Whispering Pines, hadn't just been a motel owner. He had been a hardcore doomsday prepper. But as Sarah walked further into the cavernous space, the beam of her flashlight settled on the far wall, and her blood ran cold. Built seamlessly into the reinforced concrete was a massive circular steel door. It had heavy locking bolts and a complex mechanical wheel. It looked exactly like the vault door of a major federal bank. A polished brass plate on the front read, "Mosler Safe Company, Custom Fabrication." The vault door was slightly ajar. Someone had wedged a heavy metal wrench into the base of the door frame, preventing the massive multi-ton door from clicking shut and locking. Sarah's hands shook uncontrollably. The air down here was dead and still, yet she felt a primal screaming instinct to run. But the desperate, suffocating weight of her poverty anchored her feet to the floor. If Harrison Cole was wealthy enough to build this, what on earth had he locked inside that vault? She slowly approached the steel monolith. Squeezing through the narrow 8-inch gap left by the wedged wrench, she slipped inside the vault. The interior was lined with stainless steel deposit boxes, but the center of the room held the real prize. Stacked on wooden pallets were dozens of heavy olive-green military ammunition crates. Sarah set her flashlight down on a metal table illuminating the room. She approached the nearest crate, undid the heavy metal latches, and pushed the lid open. Inside, wrapped tightly in thick layers of waterproof wax paper and vacuum-sealed plastic, were neat, brick-like bundles. She tore the plastic on the top bundle. Green paper spilled out. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward and hitting the metal table. She scrambled forward again, her trembling fingers brushing against the paper. They were $100 bills. But they weren't modern. They were old-style currency, crisp and uncirculated, bearing dates from the 1970s and 1980s. She opened a second crate. More money. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Tears of sheer, blinding shock spilled down her cheeks. She had done it. She had found a way out. Noah would never have to sleep in a freezing car again. She could afford a house, lawyers, doctors, everything. She laughed, a ragged, hysterical sound that bounced off the steel walls of the vault. She turned around, intending to run back upstairs, grab Noah, and figure out how to transport the money. But as her eyes swept across the metal table where she had set her flashlight, the beam illuminated something on the floor she hadn't noticed before. Footprints. They were in the thick layer of dust covering the concrete floor. But they weren't old, faded tracks. They were sharp, fresh, the tread marks of a heavy work boot. Sarah's hysterical laughter died instantly. The air in her lungs turned to ice. Harrison Cole had been missing for over 20 years. No one was supposed to know this bunker existed. So who made those footprints? Suddenly a sound echoed from high above her, the unmistakable deafening clang of heavy steel slamming shut. The trapdoor in room 14. Sarah screamed, abandoning the money, and launched herself out of the vault. She sprinted across the dark bunker floor toward the spiral staircase, her boots slipping on the concrete. She scrambled up the iron steps, her breath tearing through her throat in ragged sobs, until her head hit the underside of the steel trapdoor. She pushed against it. It didn't move. "Noah!" she screamed, pounding her fists against the freezing metal. "Noah, open the door." Silence. She drove her shoulders against the steel plate, pushing with the hysterical, adrenaline-fueled strength of a terrified mother. But it was useless. The trapdoor hadn't just fallen shut. From the other side, she heard the distinct, heavy sound of an external deadbolt sliding perfectly into place. Someone had locked her in, and Noah was up there alone. "Noah!" Sarah screamed again, her voice tearing at her vocal cords. She slammed her fists against the unyielding steel of the trapdoor until her knuckles bled. Silence answered her. Then, heavily muffled through the thick metal floorboards, she heard a voice. It wasn't the terrified, high-pitched cry of her 7-year-old son. It was the deep, gravelly baritone of a man. "I told you someone bought it at the auction, Mitchell. I told you we were out of time." Sarah pressed her ear against the freezing steel, her blood turning to ice water. She recognized that arrogant, venomous drawl immediately. It was Gregory Hayes, the ruthless real estate developer from the auction house. "Just secure the kid," another voice, Mitchell replied gruffly. "What about the mother?" "Leave her in the hole for now," Hayes snapped. "The air scrubbers have been dead for 20 years. Let her breathe down the oxygen, then we'll deal with the body. Tie the boy to the radiator pipe and grab the duffel bags. We're emptying that vault tonight." Sarah fell backward, tumbling down the first few steps of the wrought-iron spiral staircase. Her mind was a chaotic storm of absolute terror. Hayes hadn't been trying to buy the Whispering Pines motor lodge for the land. He had known about Harrison Cole's doomsday bunker all along. He had orchestrated the condemnation, pushing the county to bulldoze the property, so he could excavate the millions hidden below without raising a single red flag. Her desperate $100 bid had ruined his decade-long scheme. Now her son was tied up upstairs, and she was trapped in a subterranean tomb. Breathe, Sarah ordered herself, forcing her hyperventilating lungs to slow. You are a mother. You do not get to die today. She grabbed her heavy maglite and sprinted back down into the cavernous bunker. Harrison Cole was a paranoid obsessive survivalist. Paranoia dictated redundancy. There was absolutely no way an expert prepper would build a multi-million-dollar nuclear fallout shelter with only a single point of exit. A single choke point was a death trap. She swept the harsh beam of the flashlight over the reinforced concrete walls. She bypassed the diesel generators and the towering shelves of rotting MRAs, moving toward the far eastern wall. Behind a massive rusted water filtration tank, she spotted it. A heavy industrial air intake vent. It was 3 feet wide, covered by a bolted iron grate, and disappeared upward at a steep 45-degree angle into the earth. Sarah grabbed a heavy steel pipe from the generator room. She wedged it behind the rusted bolts of the vent grate and threw her entire body weight backward. The metal shrieked. She tried again, her muscles screaming, her torn fingernails slipping. For Noah, she chanted in her mind. For Noah! With a brutal crack, the rusted bolts sheared off. The heavy iron grate crashed to the concrete floor. Without hesitating, Sarah hoisted herself into the dark, corrugated steel shaft. The smell of wet earth and decades of dead insects was overpowering. The space was terrifyingly tight. The metal pressed relentlessly against her shoulders and hips. If the shaft had collapsed anywhere above her, she would be buried alive, wedged in a steel coffin. She crawled upward, digging her boots into the corrugated ridges for traction. The darkness was absolute. Cobwebs coated her face, and sharp edges of rusted metal sliced through her jeans, biting into her knees. Every inch was a battle against blinding claustrophobia. She couldn't breathe. Her chest seized. Then she felt it, a freezing, blessed drop of rainwater hitting her forehead. She pushed forward with a surge of frantic energy, slamming her hands against a wooden, louvered vent at the top of the shaft. It splintered instantly, rotten from 20 years of Pacific Northwest storms. Sarah dragged herself out of the earth, tumbling into a thick, thorny patch of overgrown blackberry bushes behind the motel. The icy rain pounded against her face. She was bleeding, covered in toxic black dust and exhausted. But she was out. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the thorns tearing at her skin, and crept around the perimeter of the rotting building toward room 14. Through the pouring rain, she saw a black Cadillac Escalade parked silently near the oak tree. Sarah crept to the boarded-up window of room 14. Through a narrow crack in the plywood, she peered inside. Noah was sitting on his sleeping bag, a thick zip tie, binding his wrists to the heavy iron radiator pipe. He was crying silently, his small shoulders shaking. In the center of the room, the steel trap door was wide open. Gregory Hayes and his enforcer, Mitchell Carter, were gone. They had descended into the bunker. Sarah didn't think. She moved. She slipped through the slightly ajar door of room 14 like a ghost. "Mommy!" Noah gasped, his eyes widening in shock and relief. "Shh!" Sarah hissed, dropping to her knees. She pulled a rusted pocket knife from the tool bag she'd brought from the car and sawed frantically at the thick plastic zip tie. With a sharp snap, it broke. She pulled Noah into a desperate, crushing hug, pressing her face into his hair. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you." Her immediate instinct was to grab Noah, run to the Honda Civic, and drive until the engine exploded. But as she looked at the gaping black hole in the floor, a cold, hard realization settled over her. Gregory Hayes was a powerful, connected billionaire developer. If she ran, he would hunt her. He would send men to find her because she knew his secret. She and Noah would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, waiting for a knock on the door in the dead of night. She couldn't just run. She had to end this. Now. Noah, Sarah whispered, looking him dead in the eyes. Go to the car, lock the doors, hide on the floorboards and do not make a sound. I will be right there. Noah nodded, terrified but brave, and slipped out the door into the rain. Sarah stood up, her jaw set, and walked to the edge of the trapdoor. She descended the spiral wrought-iron staircase, making absolutely no sound. Her muddy boots landed silently on the steel grates. When she reached the bottom, she crept to the edge of the shadows. The flashlight from the men illuminated the interior of the Mosler vault. "Grab the canvas bags," Hayes's voice echoed from inside the steel room. "There has to be 30 million in here. Unmarked, uncirculated. Cole was a paranoid fool, but he was a brilliant thief." "How are we moving this without a forklift?" Mitchell grunted. "We make trips," Hayes replied impatiently. "Just start bagging the hundreds." Sarah's eyes fell to the massive multi-ton Mosler vault door. The heavy metal wrench was still wedged beneath the bottom hinge, keeping the locking mechanism from engaging. Both men had their backs to the door, tearing into the olive-green ammunition crates with greedy fervor. Sarah stepped out of the shadows. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a mother protecting her young. She reached the vault door. She placed her right boot firmly against the heavy wrench, gripped the massive steel locking wheel with both hands, and took a deep breath. She kicked the wrench out. With her entire body weight, she threw the massive steel door forward. It swung on its perfectly engineered, frictionless hinges with terrifying speed. Hayes whipped around his eyes, widening in absolute horror as he saw the battered, bleeding woman standing in the doorway. "Wait!" Clang! The impact of the steel vault door sealing shut was deafening. Sarah instantly spun the heavy mechanical locking wheel. The massive internal deadbolts fired into place with heavy metallic thuds. Checkmate. Muffled, panicked screaming erupted from inside the impenetrable steel box, accompanied by the futile pounding of fists against metal, meant to withstand a nuclear shockwave. Sarah leaned against the vault, her chest heaving, listening to the muffled sounds of the billionaires who had tried to bury her. "Enjoy the money," Sarah whispered to the steel door. 20 minutes later, Sarah Higgins sat in the heated cab of an Oakhaven police cruiser, a thermal blanket wrapped around her shaking shoulders. Noah was asleep in her lap, exhausted by the adrenaline. The motel property was swarming with flashing red and blue lights. An FBI field agent named Thomas Reynolds stood near her window, shaking his head in disbelief as a tactical team worked to legally breach the bunker. "You really locked them in?" Agent Reynolds asked, handing Sarah a cup of terrible precinct coffee. "They trespassed," Sarah said, calmly taking a sip. The investigation that followed uncovered the greatest criminal conspiracy in Oregon's history. The cash in the vault, totaling exactly $42.5 million, was the missing loot from a legendary string of organized bank heists in the 1980s, orchestrated by Harrison Cole and Gregory Hayes's father. Hayes had been desperately trying to recover his family's illicit inheritance before the state bulldozed the evidence. Because the money was tied to federal crimes, the FBI seized it. However, under federal forfeiture laws and specific reward stipulations for recovering stolen bank funds, Sarah was legally entitled to a standard 10% finder's fee. 4 weeks later, Sarah stood in the lobby of a prestigious downtown bank. A teller handed her a certified cashier's check for $4,250,000. She didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy sports cars. Sarah hired a premier construction firm to bulldoze the nightmarish ruins of the Whispering Pines Motor Lodge. The toxic dirt was hauled away, and the massive underground bunker was filled with concrete. On top of that very same land, she built a beautiful sprawling modern home with a massive backyard, a wraparound porch, and a state-of-the-art security system. On a bright Tuesday morning, exactly a year after the auction, Sarah stood on her new porch, watching Noah run across the green lawn, laughing as he chased a golden retriever puppy. She smiled, looking down at the ground beneath her feet. Everyone had called her crazy for spending her last $100 on a ruined motel. But sometimes, hitting rock bottom is just the universe's way of ensuring you are perfectly positioned to unearth the greatest treasures hidden in the dark. Did this incredible real-life survival story keep you on the edge of your seat? The bond between a mother and her son is truly unbreakable. And Sarah's brilliant, quick thinking proves that no matter how dark things get, you can always turn the tables. If you loved this unbelievable twist of fate, hit that like button, share this amazing story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping hidden treasure dramas